Hello, and thank you for joining us for another installment of There You Go with Brian. On May 20th and 21st of 1927, aviator Charles Lindbergh made the first and longest solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic Ocean, effectively making him the most famous man in the world. His airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, was flown by Lindbergh over 3,600 miles from New York to Paris. He was awarded the Orteig Prize, worth $25,000, and received millions in celebrity endorsements. In other words, there was a lot of money in aviation in the 1920s if you could fly and live long enough to collect. It was in this environment that Amy Phipps Guest thought it was about time a woman get some attention in the world of aviation. Guest owned an airplane and decided she would fly across the Atlantic, but when her family talked her out of it, she decided to find another woman aviator to make the trip. She contacted her friend George Putnam, a newspaper publisher, and together they hatched the idea to piggyback onto the success of Lindbergh and try to set a new world aviation record, only this time with a woman. No one really knows how they settled on Earhart, but she did look very similar to Lindbergh. She had over 500 hours of flying time under her belt, and she possessed the most important attribute that was required. She desperately wanted to do it. This was to be a very long flight, almost 21 hours from Newfoundland, Canada to Wales. There would also be two other pilots on board, Wilmer Stultz and Lou Gordon. They were flying a Fokker F-7. The plane's name was the Friendship. The only problem was Amelia had never flown a Fokker F-7, and over the Atlantic was not necessarily the best place to learn. Oh, they promised her she would get some time in the pilot's seat, but as it turned out, Amelia spent the entire flight as merely a passenger. Nevertheless, when the Friendship landed in Wales, all any of the reporters could talk about was the daring young woman pilot who had just flown across the ocean and set a new world record. This would come back to haunt Amelia. She tried her best to tell the reporters that she was just a passenger and actually felt like a sack of potatoes. She told everyone that Wilmer and Lou had done the real flying, but it seemed no one wanted to listen. It made her feel like a fraud, and some say she spent the rest of her life trying to prove she was good enough. Earhart spent a few weeks in England flying different planes, but by July 6, Stultz, Gordon, and Earhart returned to New York to a ticker-tape parade along the Canyon of Heroes in Manhattan, followed by a reception with the President of the United States. The new world of celebrity came fast and furious to Amelia. George Putnam, the publisher, who was the mastermind behind bringing this opportunity to the young aviatrix, wasted no time. First, a lecture tour. Everyone wanted to know what her experience across the ocean was like. How long had she been interested in flying? And, of course, what was going to be her next adventure? She endorsed Lucky Strike cigarettes, even though she wasn't a smoker. She wrote articles for McCall's magazine, appeared in print ads for Horlicks malted milk, flew an airplane with product placement by Beechnut Chewing Gum, and even designed her own line of luggage and clothing for the active woman on the go who still wanted to look stylish. She introduced the concept of separates for women so they could get the perfect fit, and she was even the forerunner of alternative fabrics like rayon and poly products for wrinkle-free clothing that would hold up to travel. Of course, she had a very busy schedule, but Putnam told her she had to write a book and strike while the iron was hot. Her first venture into being an author was 20 hours and 40 minutes, Our Flight in the Friendship. In this book, Earhart writes about her experience as a passenger in the Friendship, which made her the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean by air. She also reflects on growing up in Kansas, how she got interested in flying, and how aviation could offer tremendous opportunity to women in the 20th century. For the next several years, Amelia Earhart became a hero to young women and an example of what anyone could achieve with hard work and guts. She entered competitive flying competitions and was the first woman to take an airplane across the United States and back in 1928. She set the world altitude record in an autogyro going up 18,415 feet. She became one of the original organizers of the 99s, an all-woman flying organization dedicated to supporting and promoting women in flight. Much has been written about Amelia's private life. She didn't date much and was engaged to Samuel Chapman, a chemical engineer from Boston, but she broke it off, and a year later, she married her manager, publisher George Putnam. Many have speculated that this was a marriage of convenience. The morning of the wedding, Amelia even had a letter delivered to George detailing she would not take his name or be beholden to him in any way. She clearly stated she did not plan to be faithful, nor did she expect him to be. There wouldn't even be a honeymoon, as Earhart had to do a 10-day train trip to promote beech nut chewing gum to earn enough money for her first solo flight across the Atlantic. She intended to fly to Paris in her single-engine Lockheed Vega 5B to emulate Charles Lindbergh's solo flight 5 years earlier. After a flight lasting 14 hours and 56 minutes, during which she contended with strong northerly winds, icy conditions, and mechanical problems, Earhart landed in a pasture at Culmore, north of Derry, Northern Ireland. The landing was witnessed by Cecil King and T. Sawyer when a farmhand asked, "Have you flown far?" Earhart replied, "From America." As the first woman to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic, Earhart received the Distinguished Flying Cross from Congress, the Cross of Knight of the Legion of Honor from the French government, and the Gold Medal of the National Geographic Society from President Herbert Hoover. As her fame grew, Earhart developed friendships with many people in high office, most notably First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who shared many of Earhart's interests, especially women's causes. On January 11, 1935, Amelia became the first aviator to fly solo from Honolulu to Oakland, California. On April 19, 1935, she flew her Lockheed Vega that she nicknamed Old Bessie from Los Angeles to Mexico City, then from Mexico City to New York. Over the next 5 years, Amelia Earhart set over 7 speed and distance aviation records, making her the most well-known pilot in the world. But as much as she loved her lovely red Vega airplane, she knew she would need something bigger and more powerful for her most challenging trip yet. Amelia wanted to fly around the world.